Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So I am David Maki at Ordo Templi Orientis, giving a class on the preparation of wine lees. I decided to give a short class on the preparation of wine lees because I've heard so many horror stories about its preparation, it atomizing in the microwave while it's being prepared, or burned, or I've heard it described as like a strange and acrid goop, which it actually is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the leavening effect, the symbolism of grapes in the vine as it pertains to the Eucharist and Crowley's particular symbolism, and some of the chemistry of distillations and evaporations, and I'll very least skim the surface of particle theory and sort of the meta-reality that is our perception of things like temperature and evaporation and boiling point. So wine lees. In Liber Alba Legis, and the commentary thereon says, "For perfume mix meal and honey and think leavings of red wine, then oil of abramelin and olive oil, and afterwards soften and smooth down with rich, fresh blood." According to the new comment, meal means ordinary wheaten flour, and leavings means the B-wing of port. He says that should be good. So what is the B-wing of port? And furthermore, what is port? Port is short, it's a contraction of Portugal, which is where the wine originally comes from. It's one of the wines that requires the most fermentation, and that's because there is a multi-step process in its manufacture. So first, it is fermented for about 3 to 5 years in oaken barrels, where it is taken out of the barrel to oxidize for a short period of time, and then from part of the original batch, ideally, you distill brandy from it. So basically all brandy is distilled port.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so they fortify the wine with that brandy to bring it up to about 18 to 20%. And so that's why it's as toxic, as toxic as it is. And then they bottle it and age it in the bottle for, in the good old days, they did it for 20 days. I used a port that was 8 years old, and that was actually, it wasn't a very good port either. It tasted like dried raisins, but it fulfilled the criteria I was looking for. So the B's wing of port is the crust-like crystalline structures that either settle on the bottom or the sides of a bottle of wine that has been aged in the bottle for a long period of time. And it's comprised mainly of potassium bitartrate. So I have handouts here. So this molecule is the one that's drawn. I drew that with ChemDraw on the bottom. And so the important thing to note about this compound are the carboxylic acids on the bottom, and I'll circle them for you. So the carboxylic acids are these groups on the bottom. Does anyone notice something peculiar about that structure, ignoring the rest of it, that is similar to something else that's important to baking? That functional group has 1 carbon and 2 oxygens. So it's, when it decomposes, when you heat it up to over 100 degrees C without water, it will produce carbon dioxide. Hence, its leavening effect produces those the pores in the bread, which are what we understand to be the difference between bread and tack. And so that's why it's important to add to your cakes of light from a chemical basis.
That leavens it, essentially.
Yeah, it leavens it. So that is the chemical basis behind it. The philosophical basis is also really important to note. Why don't we use reagent-grade potassium bitartrate instead of the leavings of red wine in particular? I mean, since it's a metabolic byproduct of yeast fermentation, you could get it from a variety of sources. So what I'm going to read from is chapter 20 from Magic in Theory and Practice of the Eucharist and of the Art of Alchemy, part 1. One of the simplest and most complete of magic ceremonies is the Eucharist. It consists in taking common things, transmuting them into things divine, and consuming them. So far, it is a type of every magic ceremony. for the reabsorption of the force is a kind of consummation or consumption, but it has more restricted application as follows. Take a substance symbolic of a whole course of nature, make it God, consume it. There are many ways of doing this, but they may easily be classified according to the number of the elements of which the sacrament is composed. The highest form of the Eucharist is that in which the element consecrated is one. It is one substance and not two, not living and not dead, neither liquid nor solid, neither hot nor cold, neither male nor female. So the important part of this section as it pertains to the elements of the Mass, you can already see that he's talking about things hot, cold, liquid, and solid, which is a foreboding of what he's about to enter into. He says that it is one substance and not two. And so adding the wine to the cakes of light is emblematic of the unity between the two elements, the goblet of wine and the cake of light, as being within the magician a single Eucharistic activity where the objects endowed with a divine presence becomes one thing and not two different virtues. The sacrament is secret in every respect. For those who may be worthy, although not officially recognized as such, this Eucharist has been described in detail and without concealment, somewhere in the published writings of the Master Therion, but he has told no one. It is revealed for the highest initiates and is synonymous with the accomplished work on the material plane. Life, that is, consumed therein. The altar is the bosom of Isis, the eternal mother. The chalice is, in effect, the cup of Our Lady Babylon herself. The wand is that which was and is to come. The Eucharist of two things has matter of the passives. The wafer, or pantacle, is of corn, typical of earth, and the wine represents water. There are certain other attributions. The wafer is sun, for instance, and the wine appropriate to Bacchus. Now, if you look in Liber 777, you'll find that Bacchus, Dionysus, and the vine are attributed to the sun. So there's an important symbolic reference. Both the goblet and the cake of light have some essence of the life of the sun within them. Through their combination, one can postulate that becomes manifest in the consumer. That is a mystery not for me to understand as of yet. The wafer may, however, be more complex. The cake of light described in Liber Legis. This is used in the exoteric Mass of the Phoenix, mixed with the blood of the magus. This Mass should be performed daily at sunset by every magician. The corn and wine are equivalent to flesh and blood, but it is easier to convert live substances into the body and blood of God than to perform this miracle upon dead matter. The Eucharist of three elements has for its basis the symbols of the three gunas. For tamas, darkness, take opium or nightshade or some sleepy medicine. For rajas, activity, take strychnine or another excitement. For sattva, calm, cakes of light, may again be suitable. The Eucharist of four elements consists of fire, air, water, and earth. These are represented by a flame for fire, by incenses or rose for air, for wine of water, and by bread and salt for earth. The Eucharist of five has for its basis wine for taste, rose for smell, flame for sight, a bell for sound, and a dagger for touch. This sacrament is implied in the Mass of the Phoenix in a slightly different form. The Eucharist of six elements has Father, Son, and Holy Spirit above, breath, water, and blood beneath. It is a sacrament reserved for high initiates. The Eucharist of seven elements is mystically identical to that of one. The method of consecrating elements is only it is only necessary to say that they should be treated as talismans, and this is appropriate because in the Eucharist of 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 elements, there's this common underlying motif that each of the weapons or reagents in a given ritual points to a single truth and are emblematic and reflective of that one philosophical concept. The circle and other furniture of the temple should be taken should receive the usual benefit of the banishings and consecrations, the oath should be taken and the invocations made. Then, when the divine force manifests into the elements, they should be solemnly consumed. There is also a simpler method of consecration reserved for initiates of high magic, of which we are unlawful to speak. According to the nature of the sacrament, so will its results be, and someone may receive a mystic grace culminating in samadhi, and others a simpler and more material benefit may be obtained. The highest sacrament, that of one element, is universal in its operation. According to the declared purpose of the work, so will the result be. It is the universal key of all magic. These secrets are of supreme practical importance and are guarded in the sanctuary with two-edged sword flaming in every way. For the sacrament is the tree of life itself, and whoso partaketh of the fruit thereof shall never die. And I'll stop reading there. The basis of what he's saying as it relates to my lecture is that every element within these two Eucharistic objects need to point towards a singular truth. And that is of two things combining to the life of the Son, or Ruach HaKohet within the initiative. Also, the symbolism of wine is really thoroughly discussed in the 12th eighth of the Vision in the Voice. So I'll read from it a little bit and comment on it as I'm capable. The charioteer speaks in a low, solemn voice, awe-inspiring, like a large and very distant bell. Let him look upon the cup whose blood is mingled therein. For the wine of the cup is the blood of the saints. The glory unto the scarlet woman, Babylon, the mother of abominations, that rideth upon the beast. For she hath spilt their blood in every corner of the earth, and lo, she hath mingled it in the cup of her whoredom. With the breath of her kisses hath she fermented it, and it hath become the wine of the sacrament, the wine of the Sabbath. And in the holy assembly hath she poured it out for her worshippers, and they have become drunken thereof. So in the face to face they beheld my Father. Thus are they made worthy to become partakers of the mystery of this holy vessel. For the blood is the life. So sitteth she from age to age, and the righteous are never weary of her kisses, and her murders and fornications she seduceth the world. Therein is manifest the glory of my Father, who is truth. The wine is such that its virtue radiateth through the cup, and I reel under the intoxication of it, and every thought is destroyed by it. It abideth alone, and its name is compassion. I understand by compassion the sacrament of suffering partaken by the true worshippers of the highest, and it is an ecstasy in which there is no trace of pain. Its passivity equals passion is like the giving up of the self to the beloved. And so the wine is symbolic of the blood, as was stated in the second paragraph that I read, and it's symbolic of the giving of thyself to the eternal. However, in this process, symbolically, you are invoking within yourself the experience of Iacchus, or the attainment of the Holy Guardian Angel, which is also associated with Tefereth. Or more particularly, this experience is in line with the unition of the Ruach with the Neshama. And so, to recapitulate, wine is used in both elements to point to a single truth, to a single willful act of manifestation within the initiate. The wine is not one type of metaphysics and the cake another. The joy of the life of the earth and the joy of the earth and the life of the Son is but one thing. They may be two different elements, but they're consecrated at the same time. The priestess always holds both of the elements at the same time, and when the magician consumes these elements, they become transmuted into one thing through the body. And so it's not arbitrary or fanciful or just the ramblings of Victorian gentlemen that the lees of port should be added, but having them both present in these two things points towards that truth, that unity, and oneness of intent.
So that makes sense then with the Mass of the Phoenix, why you only you only need to have the cake. Because you're getting both the wine and the milk.
But you're also literally giving up of your blood when you make the mark of the beast upon your breast. And so it's no longer the goblet of wine in the cake, but it's your spirit, which the salt of your blood, which you have introduced into the mix of your cakes, becomes then consecrated by the spirit of your blood instead of the symbolic of the goblet of wine. So now I'll get into the preparation of the lees of wine. These are the lees of wine. I was in a rush to produce them, so normally they're of a purple color, and they bestow their purple color onto the cakes that I make. And I brought them here for you guys to see and smell and touch if you'd like.
Pretty. Maybe half around?
Yes. I'll put one out. You'll notice that they're not like flat discs, but they're slightly raised, which accounts for part of its leavening effect. They're still very hard and tacky because it's not a yeast-activated process. So the leavening effect is limited, but still there.
Can I ask what the design is that you put in?
That is a unicrystal hexagram.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to pull the money in? Can I look?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yes. So there are two different methods of preparation that.
Well, yeah. Mine doesn't get that thick.
If I had more time, I could have made it into a crystal for you. I just didn't. That's just the way it rolled.
So how do you finally pull all the water? So you're gonna tell us how you do this.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you how you do that.
It's not just a pan on the stove like I've been doing for ever.
Well, you can do it with the pan on the stove, and I'll tell you the two different ways you can produce it. This was produced by just a basic evaporation. You can also do it via distillation. First, I'll get into distillation. If you turn to the second page of your handout, you'll see two different apparatus. On the top is what's called a Buchner apparatus, which is used for filtering. So if you have a really good bottle of wine, you won't actually have to do a distillation or any kind of evaporation. You can just gently pour your wine into some sort of a filter. I supplied a diagram of the Buchner apparatus, which is basically a filtering device that operates under a vacuum. And you can just filter out the bee's wing. On the bottom is an apparatus for what's called a short path or molecular distillation. So on the left, you'll see that rectangular device, which is a hemispherical heating mantle. And within it is your mash pot or bottom pot, and that's a round bottom flask. Above it is your distillation head, or if you read alchemy, helm, and your thermometer is above that. That condenser is called a Liebig condenser, and so basically it's a jacketed tube, and through the jacket runs water against gravity. So the water goes in through the bottom adapter and then moves up. And so your hot vapors will condense into a liquid and move into your distillate collecting flask. After your Liebig condenser, that's called a vacuum adapter, and we'll get back to that. And that's, at the end, is your collection flask. So what is a boiling point anyway? I don't know how many of you guys have taken chemistry before, but if you take alcohol up to 79 degrees, or if you take water up to 100 degrees C, it doesn't actually boil in the way that it does when you're trying to hard-boil eggs, for example. Turning the gas up to full blast and putting a pan of water on your stove is actually significantly higher, usually, than 100 degrees C. What boiling point is actually is almost an arbitrary measurement. But it's basically when the vapor pressure over your meniscus is double your atmospheric pressure. And so it's the pressure at which your solution reaches a certain level of pressure so that it's distilling at 1 atmosphere of pressure. So you have 1 atmosphere pushing down, and the surface is exerting an equal amount of pressure such that that amount of steam is vaporizing off. However, The temperature that we sense is not an absolute temperature. The temperature that our thermometers detect is not the absolute temperature. Within a glass of water, if I were to set a glass of water that measures at room temperature and feels lukewarm to our senses, there would be water molecules in that glass that are negative 20 degrees C, and there would be water molecules that are 600 degrees C. And so what...
Boltzmann distribution?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a normal distribution, and what we perceive is actually the median temperature. So when you use a refrigerator, you take advantage of this phenomenon quite a lot. What you do is you take your Freon or your propane or whatever gas it is, and you use a vacuum to suck off all the hot molecules, and you're left with just the left side of the distribution. And then you circle that around your refrigerator or your freezer, and then it goes back into the vacuum chamber where the process is repeated over and over again. And you can do this with something like acetone. You can put it in a Buchner apparatus like the one on the second page here. And instead of the funnel, you just put a cork there and suck all the air out at 0 ATMs, produce 1 ATM of negative pressure, and it'll begin to boil initially. And those are like the gases rising out of the acetone, and all of the right side of the distribution, all the hot molecules exiting the flask. And then you'll begin to notice that frost will condense at the bottom of the flask. And so that's sort of what temperature is. So at any given temperature, things will be evaporating away. And so even an ice cube is technically boiling, and if you leave one in your refrigerator for a long enough period of time, they'll completely disappear. And it's because of that phenomenon. They're still really hot. It's never absolute. Although there is such a thing as theoretical absolute zero. We have
Which is, every now and then the molecule is going to shoot off of it because it's hotter, and that's just the way it is. And so they all eventually leave.
So a distillation, basically what a short path distillation is it's a very crude form of distilling things. So when you heat up alcohol to 80 degrees C, which is slightly over its boiling point, you're not going to get 100% alcohol. You're going to get a mixture of about 70% alcohol and 30% water. If you bring the temperature above that, it's going to become closer to a 50-50% mixture, and so on. And that's because, as I had mentioned before, as the alcohol begins to evaporate, the water is building pressure and evaporating with it. And that's because things don't exist. We're familiar with the three states. You have solid, liquid, and gas. And so there's no absolute solid, no absolute liquid, and no absolute gas. They're in equilibrium with one another. There's a solid-liquid equilibrium, and then there's a liquid-gas equilibrium. And so this brings me to the point of what's called a theoretical plate. A theoretical plate is a measurement of surface area. So if we were to use a slightly different apparatus called a fractionating column, which is basically a large glass column that has like little plates, or it has balls in it, or it's filled with some other packing material like glass beads, it creates additional theoretical plates. So as the alcohol and the water rise up along these plates, it creates increasingly more instances of these liquid-gas equilibrium, to the point to where only alcohol or only compounds that are at a particular boiling point will pass through. With this process, the short path distillation, you're going to be getting a mixture of water, aromatic compounds. You'll even get a little bit of ethyl acetate and some methanol. And so it'll be sort of a very crude process. So now that we have that background out of the way I produce something similar to this is I started with a 1,000 milliliter flask, and because it's a hemispherical heating mantle, I add half of the volume because you have to give it adequate headspace. Headspace is basically the space above your solvent layer. It's called headspace. That way, when it heats up, it doesn't bump over into your collection flask. So the cold material doesn't bump over, and you're just getting things at a particular boiling point. So I filled up a 1,000 milliliter flask with 500 milliliters of, it was an 8-year port, and I distilled it at about 90 degrees. And that took about 8 hours for it to reduce down to where it was very high boiling point liquid compounds. There was still a lot of water present, but all the alcohol had moved over. The second phase of the distillation is this is a vacuum distillation or low pressure distillation. So if you look on the right, you'll see this little nipple coming off of your vacuum adapter. So I attached an aspirator which generated a negative pressure environment. So as I said before, a boiling point. Yeah.
What pressure did you take it down to?
I took it down to 0.45 ATMs. So the water was evaporating off at 65 degrees.
Okay, yeah, about 12 years to the vacuum.
And so after putting this system within a negative pressure environment, I distilled off the water at 65 degrees C. So as I was saying before, the boiling point is a point at which the vapor pressure equals the atmospheric pressure. But if you take the atmospheric pressure out of the equation, you have negative pressure, the boiling point decreases. Why did I do that? I did that because, as I said before, potassium bitartrate is a leavening agent. So if you heat it up to over 100 degrees C, especially when it gets dry, it'll decompose and produce carbon dioxide, and it'll lose its importance. And so I did that until it was about this consistency. So the take home for this is slow and steady as she goes. If you're going to distill it, use a low pressure system because the temperature at which water evaporates at a significant rate, 100 degrees, is the same temperature at which potassium bitartrate decomposes.
Okay, explain that in relation to an electric stove.
Okay. So evaporation. The evaporation procedure is a lot simpler, and this particular flask was produced by that method. So what you do is get a thermometer and heat this up to about 45 degrees C. Now what's key is that you plan ahead. If you have Mass tomorrow and you need cakes of light by that time, you're just going to you're going to burn your mixture. This took me a week to produce. It was
a week?
Yep, 150 milliliters.
Real slow.
Yep. And
you're gonna have to have.
And you're gonna have to.
If I were to try to do this on the stove,
Have it for a week.
I would have it on the stove for 1 week.
At 45 degrees.
Which
Centigrade, yeah.
Which is how much?
You can touch it with your hands.
Yeah, 45 is probably in the 130 range.
My electric stove is a glass top stove, so I have an issue with it. It goes on and off, so the temperature doesn't stay steady. So I probably want to get a small burner of some sort.
A crock pot is actually not a bad idea, because you can do some insulation. You could do insulation and then a salt bath and probably control temperature pretty well.
So it will only reduce down to a certain level. And the reason for that is because the sugar and other electrolytes present will reduce the vapor pressure. So what I did to dry this to this extent, ideally you can crystallize it even at a really low pressure, is take alcohol, 190 proof or better, and add that to your wine lees and evaporate the alcohol.
Right.
So like I said with the distillation, when the alcohol evaporates, it will carry water with it. The same thing is true with this that you're producing on your stovetop, is that you add a couple milliliters of water to it and evaporate off the alcohol, which is a lot more volatile. And you can actually evaporate this to complete dryness to where it's a red or yellowish crystalline mass.
So at what point do you add the water? Do you add it to the wine as you start, or do you add it to the distillate at that point?
The alcohol.
So he was saying you could add water to the alcohol, right?
No, you add So when you're reducing this, so this is basically just like a red wine reduction, except at a very low temperature. Once you reduce it to a certain level, you'll notice that after 2 hours, that it's the same volume, and nothing is evaporating off anymore. And that's because the electrolytes in the solution is lowering the vapor pressure to the point to where water is evaporating off at such a slow rate that it's just going to take you a really long time. So what you can do to correct that problem is add 190 or better proof alcohol, just a few milliliters at a time, like 5 milliliters, and then let that evaporate. And continue that process until it's dry.
And that'll pull the water.
That'll pull the water off.
So that'll speed up the process.
Yeah. Everclear you can get for, okay, this is how you do that.
Right to the state.
You just go to the Liquor Control Board.
Be able to buy it.
And in the state or easily.
You just go to the Liquor Control Board and apply for a Class 2 permit. It costs $5.
You've done that?
Yes, I buy it by the gallon.